J.R.R. Tolkien once said, "I wisely started with the maps and made the story fit," which was a weird thing to say because he didn't do that. Welcome to Map Crow, the RPG art show. My name is Kyle, and today we're drawing Tolkien maps. Well, I say drawing, but I really mean ranting. This is a rant video. I'm going to rant. Today's video is brought to you by MONSTROUS, a project that my friends and I are putting together to help you tell the story behind the stat blocks of monsters in your game. Check the link in the description below to download our preview packet and sign up for email alerts when the crowdfunding campaign goes live this fall. J.R.R. Tolkien and his son Christopher are responsible for some of the most beautiful maps in fantasy literature history. And the geography of Middle-earth is super important to the events of the story. Appendix B of Return of the King is packed with meticulous notes about how long it would take the Nazgul to get from here to there and back again and so on and so forth, because Tolkien felt that that kind of verisimilitude, that attention to detail, is going to inform the believability and immersion that you feel for his stories. And famously, if not infamously in my circles, Tolkien wrote a letter in response to another writer and poet, Naomi Mitchison, in April 1954. Apparently, Mitchison had been reading proof drafts of Lord of the Rings as it was being written. She mailed Tolkien some kind of feedback or questions about the writing he was doing, and I cannot find that letter surviving anywhere, but what we do have is Tolkien's response. I'll start reading at the pertinent passage. He says, "I'm sorry about the geography. It must have been dreadfully difficult without maps." He goes on to say a few lines later, "I wisely started with the maps and made the story fit, parentheses, generally with meticulous care for distances, close parentheses. The other way about lands one in confusions and impossibilities, and in any case, it's weary work to compose a map from a story, as I fear you have found." End quote. Now, that part, that "I wisely started with the map" part, is quoted frequently as advice to young writers or artists or even GMs planning a game. The common understanding of this quotation, near as I can tell, is that before Tolkien started writing Lord of the Rings, his map looked like this. And that ain't true. And as an aside, it is my general observation that there is far too much focus on complete world building before you write word one of whatever you're working on, and that is a bonkers way to work. Now listen, if you enjoy world building, if that is the way that you have fun, by all means do it. I'm not saying that the thing that you like doing is stupid or a waste of time. Some people think that what I do, like this very video, is a stupid waste of time, and they can lump it. But what I cannot abide is quotations like these being brought into context they were never meant for and being proffered as reasonable actions to take while working on your thing. And furthermore, it just does not fit the facts that we know about the writing of Lord of the Rings. Something that may not be obvious to readers now is that The Hobbit was not really set in the same universe as the Silmarillion. Now, The Hobbit did borrow some characters and place names, but there's just a lot of details that do not match what the Silmarillion writings looked like while he was writing The Hobbit. It wasn't until well into the 17-year-long writing period that it took to write Lord of the Rings that Tolkien finally decided to start integrating these two works. And when compiling and writing the commentary for The Treason of Isengard, Christopher Tolkien, who, by the way, working from his father's notes and maps, was the one that actually drew the published versions of the maps that we see in The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and Silmarillion, says the following. In The Hobbit, the Dark Tower of the Necromancer was in southern Mirkwood. It might have been argued that, at this stage in the development of the stories, Sauron had returned there to the, quote, Dark Tower of Mordor, unquote, in the south of Mirkwood. There seems to be no positive evidence that the geography of Middle-earth had yet been extended south and east of the map of the Wilderland in The Hobbit, beyond the conception of the Fiery Mountain, whose actual placing seems to be entirely vague. And it certainly cannot be assumed that my father had yet conceived of the mountain-defended land of Mordor, far away in the southeast. End quote. So now the question becomes, what map or maps did Tolkien wisely start with that he is reporting to Mitchison? The earliest maps that we have from Tolkien's Legendarium are from the 1920s, and they are maps of Beleriand, which falls into the ocean well before the events of Lord of the Rings. So I can't believe that Tolkien is referring to those maps. So for maps of what we would recognize as Middle-earth, those don't show up until the mid-1930s when Tolkien is working on The Hobbit. And the only maps that Tolkien was working on for The Hobbit was Thror's moon map and the map of Mirkwood in the Wildlands. There is no map of the Shire. There is no map of Mordor that appears at that time that Tolkien was working on. So now we are forced to ask this granular question. When Tolkien says, "I wisely started with the maps," when does starts? It is possible, if not even likely, that Tolkien was referring to this map that was worked on from 1937, when he first started working on what would become Lord of the Rings, all the way up until 1949. I would like to point out exactly how many sheets of paper are taped to one another to make the entirety of this map. It's clear that Tolkien was adding to the map as he went, and the Tolkien estate corroborates this. Personally, my money is on these maps that come along a lot later in the writing of Lord of the Rings for very specific areas like Helm's Deep and the Battle of Pelennor, where people need to know who's coming and who's going from where and how long it's going to take them to get there. So I think what Tolkien is trying to say to this letter is that whenever he was writing and ran into a geographically complicated or important area, he would stop writing and then draw the maps for it, and then make the story match those maps. It's also important to recognize that when Tolkien is writing this letter, it is after he has basically finished writing Lord of the Rings. He is at the end of the writing process, and part of that writing process was drawing maps as he went. So to him, looking back on it, maybe he got confused, or maybe he just truncated the whole thing, because this has taken many, many words to explain, and I can see not wanting to send a letter that precisely outlines his relationships with maps in his writing process. So writers, GMs, artists out there, please stop spreading this quotation as advice for creating good stories, because A, it's not true, not really the way that it's often used anyway. And B, Tolkien took 17 years to write what became 3 books. So if you're going to follow Tolkien's presumed writing advice, maybe he's not the person I would look to for, timely prep methods. Just saying. I think as artists or creators, we are constantly trying to solve what we perceive to be logistical problems. Methods, techniques, ways of doing things, the right ways of doing things, and ways to avoid doing the wrong things. So, to solve these alleged logistical problems, we start compiling all of this advice, all of these tutorials. We go to workshops and seminars, and we do everything that we can think of doing besides actually getting work done in a way that fires our passion and curiosity. Because after a certain age, everyone knows how to write. Everyone knows how to draw. I mean, maybe not very well, but you know how to get started. You could go make a drawing right now. These are not logistical problems we are faced with. They are largely emotional ones. We swaddle ourselves in quotations from our favorite authors. We wear them as talismans to protect us from doubt, to protect us from our own internal echo chamber that says, you don't know what you're doing and you're gonna make a fool of yourself. It's okay when you are in your creative process and you get stuck to go looking for other options, to go looking for advice. And it's natural as part of the research and curiosity of your craft to be compelled to find out what the artists that you're attracted to were up to and how they did things. But I implore you not to allow that fact-finding and advice-asking to paralyze you, to keep you away from the thing that makes you happy. Do you want to be a habitual tutorial watcher, or do you want to be an artist? Do you want to be someone who reads a lot of books about writing, or do you want to write? And perhaps, more pointedly, do you want to write your thing, or do you want to write only to chime in to tell other writers that wisely, Tolkien started with the maps? Thank you so much for watching, and be sure to check the links in the description below to check out what we're doing with MONSTROUS. I think we have a great team, and we are putting together a beautiful book that you will love. Also, there are plenty of links that I used to conduct my research for this episode, including an episode of Mythgard Academy where Corey Olsen is talking about the book Treason to Isengard, and that's when I started thinking about Tolkien starting with the maps or not. Corey Olsen has had a tremendous impact on my artistic journey and creative process, and I think if you liked this episode, you will love Mythgard Academy. And also, if you want to download the grids that I use to draw these maps, and indeed this very map that I drew today, those are also in the links below. So until next time, my friends, farewell. Welcome to the Aftercrow, where I answer questions from the community and thank my patrons. The last time I drew a map, I was asked by a few people why a hex grid. And the answer that I'm aware of to that question is because back in the old days of D&D, when it was still basically like a zine that you had to mail in for, rather than writing their own rules and procedures for overland travel, they would instruct players to go buy a completely different board game called Outdoor Survival. And because Outdoor Survival used a hex grid to make their maps compatible with that game, they also started using hex grids for overland travel maps. Now, why Outdoor Survival decided to use a hex grid map, I really couldn't tell you. And for the map that I drew on this episode, I'm really interested to know how many viewers spotted that I was drawing a map in the style of Tolkien, but I was referencing maps by cartographer Miska Fredman from MCDM's Kingdoms and Warfare. I wanted to draw a fan map because I am really excited about what those fine folks are doing with the company now that they are, officially working on their own RPG and setting guide, and I will be watching that very closely. I am not affiliated nor have I been hired by MCDM to make this map or any other maps. Just want to be clear, this is just a fan thing. It has been a fairly stressful week in tabletop games, and I, for one, am optimistic and hopeful because of all of the wonderful independent creators, and that is what TTRPGs have always been built on. From the very beginning, it was put together by scrappy little zinesters making their weird crap and sharing it with each other. And that's really how I think of this show. If I was back at the dawn of desktop publishing in the 70s and 80s, I would have been, writing for zines and mailing them to people. I will see you all in the next one.